everybody is aware of their bodies, aware of their body shape, aware of their weight, of what they're eating, of what they feel they quote unquote should be eating. If I was in a place where there was a lot of like chat in my workplace about bodies and dieting, and I recognized that is not a healthy environment for me to be in. So I took an inventory of that and took steps to put boundaries in place there. And of course, I didn't have to quit my job for that. I'm not saying anybody should have to go to that extreme, but even just to notice that this is not helpful to be around this kind of chat. You are so much more than your weight, your body, what you eat. Doesn't matter what kind of profession that you're in. And then another thing which stems on from that is reconnecting with myself, my true self. Because when you are in binge eating, it consumes your entire life. You think about it all the time. It's always on your mind. You're always starting new plans. You're planning what you're going to buy from the shop for your meals. You're weighing out foods. You're logging your weight on the scales. Like I could go on and on and on of how consuming this is. But there was a whole other person that didn't get any airtime then because I was so consumed with this. So I reconnected with who I was before I developed a problem with binge eating. So I was somebody that always really appreciated travel in my late teens and early 20s. Any excuse to travel I got, I would take it. And I lost that then when I started binge eating because I just didn't have the mental capacity for it.
Today, I'm pleased to introduce my special guest. Jo is a registered dietitian specializing in eating disorders, in particular binge eating disorder. She shares her expert insight into recovering from binge eating disorder and finding peace with food again on the Binge Eating Dietitian podcast and her Instagram page at binge.eating.dietitian. Without further ado, here's our conversation. Jo, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Absolutely. I would love to hear your story, and I'm sure the listeners would love to hear your story as well.
Yeah, sure. So I have a multifaceted story with binge eating, I guess you could say. So my real passion for helping people to recover from binge eating in one part, it stemmed from my own history with binge eating. I have a bit of a different story compared to some dietitians. It's pretty common for dietitians to have their own history with an eating disorder. But for me, I didn't have an eating disorder as a child, as a teenager. I had a really peaceful relationship actually when I was in those years, in my formative years. But when I became a dietitian and I all of a sudden had this hat on of being a professional, everyone's looking to me for advice. I should know what I'm doing. I should know how to eat, what to eat. I should be the one that is living this perfect lifestyle and is eating this perfect diet. And with that pressure and with that new identity, all of a sudden my beforehand what was a very natural relationship with food, something that just came very easy to me. I didn't have to overthink it. I was very much an intuitive eater. All of a sudden I had lots of questions like, well, I'm a dietitian now, so is it still okay that I like to eat sweets? I'm a dietitian now, so can I still go to McDonald's at the weekends with my friends? I'm a dietitian now. Should I really be going out drinking alcohol at the weekends? I started to meddle in my relationship with food. I started to eat basically how I thought a dietitian was supposed to eat. I started to like cut out sugar and like reduce carbs and live a very like a very stereotypical healthy diet, I guess you could say. But the thing is that just wasn't me. It didn't fit in with my lifestyle. It didn't fit in with who I really was. And while that was going on one side, as a dietitian, where people were coming to me for advice, I was in the background binging whenever I had a chance to be alone. So that went on for quite a number of years. I had then another relapse in 2019, and in 2020, that's when I decided, okay, if I'm struggling with this and I am a dietitian, surely that means the person on the street is struggling with this. The woman on the street who is doesn't have that whole nutrition background, doesn't understand the complexities of food and nutrition and health and wellness. Surely they have a really big issue with food too, and I can really help them. So that's really where the binge eating dietitian began. So personal struggles, then decided to take it forward as the binge eating dietitian. I went and did a postgrad in eating disorders. I'm now working towards my doctorate, so I have come at it from a few different angles.
Mm-hmm. That's so fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have so many questions now. So you said that you really started the issue with binging after you became a dietitian. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
So about what year was that?
2014.
2014. That's so fascinating. Like, where do you feel you are on your recovery journey right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Recovery actually is not a very well defined term. There's not like
Right.
a one stop shop for what does it mean to be recovered. Having said that, though, I do consider myself to be in a very strong place of recovery. I don't binge eat anymore. I haven't in since that relapse in 2019 where I tried to diet for a wedding that I was attending and my binge eating problems just came right back. So since then, and I guess now as well, I'm very at peace with who I am, what I do, what I say, because sure, I'm a dietitian, but I'm an eating disorder specialist dietitian now. So what I say to my clients is what I practice myself and it's what I truly believe. Whereas before, when I just qualified, I thought I was supposed to be the healthy one. And of course, that isn't an actual thing. That's just how my 22-year-old brain perceived that. In a really strong place of recovery, never taking it for granted though. I appreciate that maybe binges could come back. I've had some interesting moments, particularly I've just had a baby in 2021 and another one the next year, and I had some interesting issues with like body image. A lot of people commenting on my body during pregnancy, like all
Yeah.
the comments that I got, and I was like, oh, this is new, this is interesting. But thankfully, I was able to just look at that as from an outsider perspective, not internalize that, take it on board as just information to get curious about and not let that jeopardize all the incredible work that I've done for the last 10 years.
hmm I've noticed in your Instagram feed that you're really into intuitive eating and um, eating whatever you want, like all foods in moderation and so forth. Do you think that the permission was the greatest thing that helped you into recovery? Was it like eating with awareness, or what were some of the key elements that helped you kind of get out of the binge eating cycle?
That's a really good question, and one that I don't get asked that often. So thank you for putting that to me. What was the thing that brought me into recovery? If I look back on it now, I think one of the biggest things was taking an inventory, you might say, of my environment and particularly the people that I was surrounded by.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is aware of their bodies, aware of their body shape, aware of their weight, of what they're eating, of what they feel they quote unquote should be eating. If I was in a place where there was a lot of like chat in my workplace about bodies and dieting, and I recognize that is not a healthy environment for me to be in. So I took an inventory of that and took steps to put boundaries in place there. And of course, I didn't have to quit my job for that. I'm not saying anybody should have to go to that extreme, but even just to notice that this is not helpful to be around this kind of chat. You are so much more than your weight, your body, what you eat, doesn't matter what kind of profession that you're in. And then another thing which stems on from that is reconnecting with myself, my true self. Because when you are in binge eating, it consumes your entire life. You think about it all the time. It's always on your mind. You're always starting new plans. You're planning what you're going to buy from the shop for your meals. You're weighing out foods. You're logging your weight on the scales. Like I could go on and on and on of how consuming this is. But there was a whole other person that didn't get any airtime then because I was so consumed with this. So I reconnected with who I was before I developed a problem with binge eating. So I was somebody that always really appreciated travel in my late teens and early 20s. Any excuse to travel I got, I would take it. And I lost that then when I started binge eating because I just didn't have the mental capacity for it. So I took it on myself to, okay, let's go on a trip. Even though you're not feeling great about your body, about your food, you love travel, let's go on a trip and let's find that connection with yourself again. Everybody talks about how binge eating is such a lonely place to be, and it is because your binge eating wants you to be isolated, it wants you to be alone, it doesn't want you to be out with your friends on Saturday night, it wants you to be in your house in your bedroom on a Saturday night or ordering Uber Eats and feeling ashamed for it.
So it sounds like there's a lot of internal stuff going on. Like it's not necessarily as much about the nutrition. And I know one of your big titles is you're a registered dietitian. And as you work with your clients, I'm imagining that you're bringing in a lot of your personal experience. It's like maybe it's not just about the food. Maybe there's something else. Bringing in your experience and your perspective on that with your clients. How do you incorporate talking about emotions, or maybe opening up your identity or distancing yourself from toxic relationships? How does that come into your work with clients, if it does?
Yeah, it does. So, of course, I am a registered dietitian, meaning my skill set, my expertise lies in the kind of the food side of binge eating. So I appreciate what I've just spoken about as being the things that helped to take me out of it were not related to food directly. And that's just a really good insight into how the bigger picture can play a bigger role here, not just about the food itself. You know, it's said that eating disorders, they're about food, but they're not about food. It's kind of tricky.
So speaking about dietary advice or, the dietary piece, are there certain things that you would look at with someone who is trying to recover if we are assuming that you're already trying to work on things like permission and the other lifestyle factors, what tips would you give to someone as far as food is concerned if they're trying to recover, like making sure they're getting certain micronutrients or macronutrients?
It's a question that is going to have different answers for everybody. It depends where you're at. Like, are you at a place where you're starting a new diet every Monday? Or it's even escalated further than that. You're starting a new diet every single day. Are you constantly trying to achieve maybe low carb or intermittent fasting or some kind of time restricted eating or cutting out sugar or keto or vegan? Are you on a bit of a hamster wheel of constantly trying to achieve one of those, but it doesn't work and you end up binging? Maybe it is every day. For some people, it's more than once a day. We have to see where you're at, where your picture is, and again, take very small, gradual steps to get you to a place of a more. I don't like the term normal eating because what is normal eating? But certainly to a place of maybe regular eating where food is included in the day, in the form of meals or of snacks and of snacks, hopefully. And you would be really surprised, pleasantly surprised about the massive difference that can make to your binge eating just by introducing more regular meal times if that's something that you're not doing right now.
If there's people who come to you who have preferences, allergies, or things like that, can you support like, like people who prefer keto or, all these different things? I know that that can be tricky because sometimes that can feed in, but then for other people, they find it's helpful.
Yeah, of course. If someone has an allergy, absolutely, there's no question about that. We can make binge eating recovery work while incorporating your allergy with the likes of keto, with low carb, with fasting. We have to just zoom out and look at when you started that plan, when you started keto, when you started low carb, how does that correlate with your binging? And I know this can be very painful for someone to do because they really want to be able to follow this diet. And I really respect that. But you have to be true and honest with yourself. Did your binging get worse when you started on keto? Did it get worse when you started doing intermittent fasting? And if it did, that's okay. Maybe full keto is not helpful for you because of the binging, but maybe we could modify it a little bit to make it a little bit more palatable for you, reduce the binges, but still allow you to be on a path that you want to.
So I think you might have a really interesting perspective because you're from Ireland, you're now living in the UK. And if I interpreted correctly, did you live in the United States for a bit?
Yeah, I did. Lived in Boston for 3 years. I just moved back
Okay,
last year.
cool. So you have this really cross-culture perspective, as I imagine you really did have a focus on eating disorders in all those places. Is there like drastic difference in statistics or in your perceptions of women as they deal with eating disorders in those different countries, or is it kind of the same?
Love that question too. Thank you. So, one thing I did notice from living in the US is, and this is just like a little observation of mine. I
Yeah.
noticed that when you live in the US, where you do your food shopping, like where you buy your food from, like your groceries, really said a lot about who you were as a person. Or it was a way of being categorized like, oh, you shop at Whole Foods or you shop at Sprouts, which I know is popular in California, or you shop in Trader Joe's. Okay, that says something about you. You kind of get put into these boxes depending on where you do your food shopping. And that is not a thing in the UK. Like we have a couple of more like higher end supermarkets that yeah maybe you might would attract as more of a certain demographic, but I did not experience that in the UK as I did in the US. I thought that was really interesting. In Ireland, if I bring that in, Ireland is traditionally a Catholic country, and I think that comes with a lot of inherent values in our society about guilt for basically overconsumption of anything. So, like spending too much, drinking too much, eating too much. And there is absolutely a feel in Ireland about being watched, not by anybody in particular, but just having this feeling of like being deviant against those values when you're someone who's struggling with binge eating. So, in terms of statistics, the statistics really are the same. Sadly, binge eating is not a well measured eating disorder behavior, probably because of the stigma and shame associated with it. We just don't have good data on it. But it is probably the most common eating disorder. Binge eating disorder is the most common eating disorder in all three, I would say.
Absolutely. So, did you go to UK for your studies, or what brought you to the UK?
It's a really boring answer to that question. We had to move for my husband's work, basically.
Okay.
So
Okay.
my husband is from Romania. We met in Ireland, and then he had to move for work to the UK, and then went to US to do his PhD, and now we're back in the UK.
So tell me about your PhD program. So we're both PhD students, and that's super exciting. So I'd love to hear about your study and where you're at in your program and what inspired you and everything about it.
Thank you. I'm really excited to talk about it because I haven't spoken about it that much. I, as you know, doing a PhD. I'm actually doing an EdD, which is a doctorate of education.
Okay.
With doing a doctorate, it's so confusing, and your journey is just such a roller coaster that even 3 years in, you might not have an idea of what exactly that you're doing. So that has been
It's
me for
true.
the last little while. But recently, I've really nailed it down exactly what I'm doing. And I feel like I'm on a straight path now, thankfully. So my study is centered on the lived experience of people who binge eat in Ireland. So I wanted to bring it to the fore about what it is truly like to live with this eating disorder in Ireland, in this small country where there's very limited services for eating disorders. In Ireland, there's a public health system and there's a private health system. Public health services for eating disorders are really poor, and people with binge eating usually fall to the very bottom of the prioritization list because it's not associated with like rapid decline of health like some of the other eating disorders. So my study is drawing on what it is truly like to live with an eating disorder, with binge eating disorder in Ireland, and looking at it from that social perspective, because eating disorders are biopsychosocial conditions. The biology, I think I know a lot about from my 10 years now as a dietitian, have that side covered. The psychology, actually, you're doing from a psychology point of view, aren't you? Yeah. Psychology, I know a bit about because it kind of is brought into the bio a bit, and because it's a mental health condition, that does, I've got my head around that a little bit. But the sociology of binge eating, I think, is really overlooked. That's what I want to bring to the fore about this, not so much the individual experience of binge eating, which is very important, but instead how, as a society, binge eating operates there. So, like what I said about Ireland being a Catholic country, Catholic values, there's a feeling of being judged, of being watched, even though nobody is. But living in such a small country with such a community value, it can feel like that. And certainly that's what's coming out of my study.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Well, first off, congratulations. And that's amazing. Are you only in your third year right now?
No, I'm not. I'm at the beginning of my
Okay.
last year, actually.
Okay.
But because I'm doing an EdD, it's a little bit more flexible. So I think I have up to 2 years to submit. So fingers crossed.
Okay. Okay. That's wonderful. I was like, oh my gosh, you're flying in your program. Um, that sounds fascinating. And I really love the piece about bringing in kind of like the sociological piece of like the interpersonal, but kind of like in a collective, like how
Mhm.
does the values of the society and the culture and the history sort of inform maybe judgment, treatment, services offered, and that sort of thing. So I think that that's such a unique inquiry that you're doing, and I think that's really really interesting. And so it sounds like it's all qualitative.
Absolutely. Yeah, which sounds like it should be easier, right? It's all conversations and, long transcripts versus numbers. But anybody
Oh,
who's
it's going
ever
to
done a
take some
qualitative
time.
study, yeah, there's a lot of thick data, and I'm very grateful for it. So I interviewed 10, 11, actually 11 women experiencing binge eating in Ireland, but not who are not diagnosed with any eating disorder. And I got like some incredible insight, and I really can't wait to write it up now and get it out to the world, particularly for my profession as a dietitian. We really don't study much about the sociology side of it. So that's going to be my contribution, is helping dietitians understand binge eating from the social perspective.
I love that. So it'll be 11 women. That will be the basis of it.
That's where the data is coming from. Yeah, 11.
Okay. And so it sounds like you learned some things because you have deep lived experience in this. And so even despite your lived experience as someone who suffered from binge eating disorder in Ireland, you still found things that surprised you from the data.
Oh, for sure. And even though I do have my own history with binge eating, I don't center that in much of my work. A little bit. It comes up like it came up at the beginning of our conversation, but I completely recognize that I have never lived in a bigger body. Even when I struggled with binge eating, my body just increased. Sorry, my body size increased just a couple of dress sizes, and that was it. People who struggle with binge eating usually are in bigger bodies. So there's the added layer of the stigma, the shame, the discrimination for just existing in a larger body. Whereas I never experienced that because I have just my thin parents, siblings look pretty like me, my parents, my grandparents. It's just, it is purely down to genetics, I really believe. I don't see myself as being like an expert in what it's like to experience binge eating in Ireland, because most people have that extra layer of stigma and shame, which impacts every aspect of their lives. So I'm a bit of an insider into my research, but not really. And I'm just really grateful for the women for sharing those stories with me.
Sounds like really important work, and I love your recognition and your just awareness of places you might have some blind spots, and where you're open to the participants in your study to help you illuminate a deeper story. If anyone wants to follow you, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Find your stuff? What's the best way to do that?
So if you use Instagram, please do follow me. I'm at binge.eating.dietitian. If you like listening to podcasts, obviously you do because you're listening to this one, you can check out my podcast, Binge Eating Dietitian Podcast. My website is bingeeatingdietitian.com. And yeah, you can find me there. I love to get emails and messages from people who listen. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here.